Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Mark. This is Why I Hate the World. What's happening? And starting today at 11:30, had needed a few minutes to get stuff going. But today we are going to be talking about aliens. Now there are far, far, far too much to go through in one stream, of course. So this is probably going to be part one of a series. Um, but before we jump into that, let's take a look at what we're working on here. Also, if you're watching me for the first time, please like and subscribe, all that stuff, blah, 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 tell your friends, whatever. So, here's our piece that we're working on, and before we were sort of cleaning up around the edges here, and yeah, looking pretty good, and I think I'm going to work some more in this middle so you can kind of see this seam that goes through it. That's because this was originally a journal that I like doodled this in. And so when I scanned it, that's like the middle of the book. So we're going to work on eliminating that today. So, um, yeah, aliens. Aliens are real. They are. Pony Throat, hey, what's going on? Thanks for joining. Aliens are real. And we can say this with confidence because the universe is gigantic. The universe is beyond huge. It's larger than we can possibly imagine, right? When you see a picture of a galaxy, that's something just our normal ordinary galaxy that we live in. When we don't actually have a picture of the Milky Way, but we can kind of extrapolate what it looks like and then look at similar spiral galaxies in the universe and kind of get an idea of what the Milky Way is. The Milky Way is immensely huge, like larger than you could ever possibly comprehend. Like our brains can't really understand how large the galaxy actually is. To be honest, our brains can't even really understand um, units of measurement within our own solar system. The Earth is 93 million miles away from the sun. That's just some number that gets thrown out, and you go, "Oh, that's far." No, that's farther than you will ever. Your brain can't comprehend how far that is. It's like you would never be able to travel that far. Like even if you got in like a spaceship and you went like 20,000 miles an hour or something, or 50,000 miles an hour or whatever, it would take you years, right? Like to travel that distance. It's immensely huge. This is not a distance that you could walk ever in your entire life. You couldn't fly this distance in an airplane. You couldn't get in a car and drive this distance. It's just not possible. So when we say how large, and then then you think, okay, well the nearest star to the Earth is 4 light years away. Light years, like the distance that light travels within a year is like and then it goes something like more than 100,000 miles per second. You just that's trillions of miles, you know. I don't have the exact number in front of me about how far that actually is, but it's pretty damn far. So to think that, then there are stars in our galaxy which are hundreds of thousands of light years away from us, if not millions of light years away from us. And then you think, well, there are then millions upon millions of galaxies which are farther away than that, millions and billions and trillions and quadrillions of light years away. Galaxies which are so far away that they shouldn't technically exist. For example, there's a very famous picture. In fact, I'm going to look this up just to solidify the point. Dog, quiet. I don't know if you can hear my dog there. Let's see here. There was Deep Space Galaxy. I probably should have looked this up before the stream, huh? Hubble telescope. Let's see if I can find this picture. There we go. Hubble deep fields, right? So there's this image right here. Let's see if I can just actually. Will it let me just zoom in on that? Of course it won't. Okay, hang on a second, guys. Let me just copy this. Let me put this down in my thing here. See, goddamn internet won't let me just like zoom in on a picture. Right? It makes you like, let me just copy that there. Let's just make this bigger. And let's bring this over. Whoa, what happened? Oh, there we go. Let's bring this over to my other screen here so you guys can take a look at it. So this image that we are now going to be looking at, why can we not see anything? Laptop window. Oh, wait a minute. That's on the wrong side. It should go over here. There we go. That's weird. I don't know why it did that. Anyway, this image here, which we are looking at, is what it is they took it's a little pixelated, because I had to download it off the internet real quick. But basically what they did is they pointed the Hubble telescope at a area of the sky which was blank. There was nothing in the sky, right? And they turned the Hubble telescope on to its like maximum, capacity or whatever, and shown it there and took a picture. And this is what came back. So you can kind of see here, some of these are like this here, and that's like a star, that's in between us or actually that's like a galaxy that's in between us and the rest of these. Everything in this picture is a galaxy. Like these are not stars. Like I thought, like that's not a star. That's not a star. They're pointing at a piece of the sky that had no stars in it. So these are all galaxies, right? Even these little teeny tiny dots that you see way off in the distance, those are also galaxies. These were all galaxies which, before this point, were undiscovered and not named. And most of these in this picture, from my understanding, have not been cataloged just yet. Galaxies which are so far away that they technically shouldn't exist because they are older than, what the conventional wisdom is of what time galaxies should have started forming in the universe, right? That's how large the universe is. So let's turn that off. And that means these are, so ridiculously far away that we'll never like reach them, right? Let's turn off that YouTube thing and let's move this back over here. There we go. Okay, right. It is not logical to assume that we are the only inhabited planet in a universe that is this large. It's just not. It just doesn't make any sense. The chances that there are life on other planets within our galaxy and within the rest of the universe is 100%. The chances that there are intelligent life in the rest of the universe is 100%. In our galaxy, maybe not so much. There could be, and this would be a fluke, and I would say that this is highly, highly, highly unlikely. But it could be that through some fluke of chance, we are currently the only like advanced civilization in the galaxy. I would give that like a 0.1% chance, like very, very, very low chance of that happening. But it could be. You never really know. That's the thing about all this, is that we don't really have proof one way or another. But it's just, the vastness of the galaxy itself lends to the fact that there is life elsewhere, right? What we don't have proof of is what that life is, where it's located, what it entails, how advanced is it, stuff like that. We have no idea of any of that stuff. This is all speculation. I mean, there very well could be a chance that, well, maybe we are the only life in the universe, which doesn't make any sense to me, but until we have any proof one way or the other, we really don't know. Right. So this idea has always kind of fascinated me, as a child, and even today. The idea of life on other planets and civilizations on other planets has really fascinated me, and this is a subject that I've spent a lot of my youth, and I mean, to be honest, even my adult life sort of reading about, like what could it be like, what could a civilization in particular of other, people, beings, aliens, whatever, what would it entail? Would they believe the same kind of things we would have? Would they have religions? Would they have symbolism the same way? Like, Would they reproduce the same way we do, eat the same kind of food, blah blah blah, that kind of thing. It's always really fascinating me, even more so, than the whole like space opera. Like, I mean, of course, I'm not gonna lie, I was, you know, really into like, science fiction and stuff as well. But just looking past like spaceships and ray guns, it really did fascinate me about what it could be like out there, and how different or how similar we would all be, right? Um, and it just happens that we have in real life some evidence to show that there may have actually been visitors to this planet from elsewhere. Now, when I say evidence, the evidence for UFOs is probably the best among, like, if you were to take any paranormal subject, right? Like, let's like, because all of this stuff kind of gets like grouped together. When you talk about the paranormal, they talk about like ghosts and cryptids and like demons and monsters, stuff like that. Paranormal stuff, psychic abilities, blah 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 blah. Grouped in with that is usually UFOs and aliens. That's like a subset of the paranormal studies out there. Like, if you go to the paranormal section of the bookstore, you'll find all of this. And then, you start seeing kooky stuff too, like alien contactees, people like, George Amansky, that kind of thing. People who claim that they were not just abducted by aliens, but are getting secret messages from the Star Brothers and blah, 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 and aliens built the pyramids, that kind of bullshit. Right. All of that gets lumped into paranormal stuff. But as far as there being unidentified objects in the sky, like, that phenomenon probably has the best evidence for, out of all of that stuff, right? There's better evidence for the existence of UFOs than there are for Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster or ghosts of the Bermuda Triangle or Atlantis or any of that. Okay, so which is to say, though, that it's still not conclusive. Especially nowadays. Nowadays, when you have a computer that can, where anybody has the capability, like a tool that can produce Hollywood-style special effects from their bedroom, you can't take just a simple photo as gospel anymore, like you could, 40 or 50 years ago, right? So I'm not going to cover like the best evidence for UFOs in this stream, but I do want to talk about the beginning of the phenomenon, right? Leading up until sort of like to give like a base of where we're coming from, because in ufology, there's sort of a mythology that has been crafted, right? Depending on who you talk to. And it's kind of, I think, good to start at the very, very beginning so that we can kind of see where it all came from. Because if you just jump right into ufology and abductions and Men in Black and the J-Rod and Area 51, all that stuff, it's very easy to get lost in it because, first off, there's years and years and years worth of material that one could cover. All of it sort of like interlocks with each other, and there's lots of things that were inspired by or draw upon prior knowledge of other events as well, that kind of thing. There's lots of stuff that if you don't have like the proper background, it's not going to make sense. So I figure, we should start at the very, very beginning and kind of like give. So this stream is going to be more about the early history of the UFO phenomenon all the way up until the mid '60s with the Barney and Betty Hill abduction. Which, if you haven't heard about that, that's a load of fun. So, okay. So, believe it or not, the first modern sight. So there was always sort of UFO sightings, strange things in the sky, going back, hundreds, if not thousands of years. Shows like Ancient Aliens and stuff will go through and try to find evidence of alien contact inside of religious paintings or archaeology or the writings of Pliny the Elder or some shit like that. And that's great to think about, but there's not really much in the way of proof with any of that because those types of sources are open to interpretation. You know, especially when it comes to supposed UFO sightings encoded within artwork. Medieval Christian artwork and stuff like that. These are all tropes that you can interpret in many different ways. And even though it looks like a guy and his dog pointing at a flying saucer, in real life it's symbolism for some religious thing, right? So, but I think it's good to start in the late 19th century with what is known as the Phantom airship, like the mystery airship wave, which is sort of like the first wave of UFO sightings, right? So it's good to note that during this time, they didn't see flying saucers so much. They didn't see metallic aircraft that we would associate with something that flies in the sky. What they this first wave was mainly dirigibles, balloons, dirigibles, blimps, that kind of thing, right? Dirigible being a blimp with a canopy beneath it, right? And these are things that existed. They weren't in wide use so much at this time, but there were people experimenting with them. And hot air balloons were a thing that had been around for 100 years at that point. So people would be familiar with balloons in the sky with people in them. And this first wave kind of started in the American West, and we know this because there's newspaper reports going back to that time. Started in around 1896, although there's a few that predate that. And they were sort of like, usually they would be, if there were nighttime sightings, they would be lights in the sky, right? Um, and then daytime sightings would be of airships, sort of like I said, dirigible, blimp, Zeppelin style things, right? The thing about them is that they were reported of course, going way faster than normal dirigibles can actually go. Like blimps and balloons and dirigibles aren't really like the fastest things in the sky, you know. And of course, these reports were of airships that were zipping around like super fast, like airplanes, that kind of thing. Most of the time, they would be described as somewhat fantastic looking with lots of lights. But interestingly, they would also have things like paddle wheels, propellers, you know, that kind of thing, right? Electric lights, this was all new stuff back then, right? And these were, the thing about it, which makes it interesting, is that these reports sort of, people reported seeing things that they like were like sort of fit the technology of the time, right? There weren't, jet engines or like, flying saucers that zipped around at 12,000 miles an hour, that kind of thing. Like they would see blimps that had like big flywheels on them and paddle wheels and that kind of thing. And there are plenty of reports of people meeting the pilots of these strange phantom aircraft. More often than not, the pilots would actually be human, and it would be a story of some wacky like wild-haired inventor that created an airship and was flying it around the West or whatever. These reports were so bad that in 1897 there was sort of a mass panic, where people thought that Thomas Edison had invented a flying airship like that looked like a star and was flying it around. And Thomas Edison, had to give sort of a public like statement saying that no, this is all fake. I didn't create anything. It's not me, right? And so it's sort of like an early precursor to what would later happen, like with the War of the Worlds broadcast from H.G. Wells and stuff. People were kind of panicking over this kind of thing. And there's actually reports of, for example, there was a report of an airship trying to steal someone's cattle, which is like an early precursor to the whole cattle mutilation thing as well. Like it was a report about an airship put a lasso down, grabbed like a cow and was trying to fly away with it, and then it got caught up in this fence, and the farmer was like shooting at it and blah 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 blah. Right. Um, so they were usually seen as moving. The thing about this is that even though they went faster than normal, like dirigibles could fly, they were usually seen as flying slowly over the sky. You know, that kind of thing. Um, there is one prominent case that is worth mentioning, which sort of differs from the rest of them, and it's very interesting because it's sort of like a precursor to the modern UFO abduction cases, right? And this was in November of 1896 from a guy named Colonel H.G. Colonel H.G. Shaw, right? Um, and he saw what it was is that Colonel Shaw was in his is that his name, Colonel Shaw? Hang on a second. Do I have that written down right? I might have that. I don't think his last name is Shaw actually. I think it just says Colonel H.G. was his name. So I'll just call him HG. So Mr. HG was in a horse and buggy with a friend of his, and they're driving down the street, near Stockton, California, right? And they come around a bend and they see an airship which is, you know, landed on the ground, right? And they described it as being metallic, 25 feet in diameter, sort of a cigar shaped kind of thing. And he said that the outside was completely metallic, had no windows, nothing like that, and there was nothing, but there was sort of like a rudder type fin at one end, and then both ends were pointed, right? So think of like a long sort of cigar with a fin at the end of one side. And he said that he saw three beings, which he did not think were human, that came out of this spacecraft, I guess. Although he didn't call it a spacecraft, he said it was an airship. So keep that in mind too, right? And according to him, the three beings who came out were 7 feet tall, very, very skinny and lanky, and they were covered in a sort of fine, downy kind of hair, like from a newborn, like, chicken, that kind of down, and they were emitting a strange warbling noise, as they walked up to him. So like these weird sort of like lanky chicken men, right? Didn't see anything about the description of their faces or anything like that, unfortunately. Couldn't find that. And apparently, the three occupants tried to kidnap him, but they weren't physically strong enough to actually drag him onto the ship. And the colonel and his friend that were with him were able to fight them off. So they physically had to fight them off. Whereupon the three tall, wobbling chicken men sort of ran onto their ship, which rapidly ascended and then flew away. That kind of sounds a little bit different to me than all of the other, you know, the other cases that I'm reading. That actually sounds something a little bit closer to what we would see as a typical UFO abduction today, right? Most of the other cases that from this era kind of sound like hoaxes. And, usually it's like because most of them will be something really ridiculous. Like, for example, here's one. Here's a good case, right? One of the stories, this was in 1897. Some people saw a airship that landed that had 5 occupants in it. And the occupants of the airship were wearing weird uniforms. And they were close to normal people. They looked like normal people. And the occupants claimed to be descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, who said they learned English from the 1553 North Pole expedition led by Hugh Willoughby. Right. Not a lot of details on this one. That's all there was. That kind of sounds like maybe that was a hoax. Another one on April 10th, 1897, in St. Louis. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch newspaper published this story that a man named W.H. Hopkins encountered a grounded airship about 20 feet long and 8 feet in diameter near Springfield, Missouri. And he said that the ship had three large propellers on it and was crewed by a beautiful nude woman and a bearded man who was also nude. And he tried to communicate with the crew, and they understood what Hopkins was asking, and they both pointed to the sky and said something that sounded like the word Mars. Yeah, doesn't seem like that would be a real story to me. Right. Here's another one which kind of clinks it. This is the Albion Weekly News newspaper. Right. Reported that two witnesses saw an airship crash just very close to where they were standing, and the airship suddenly disappeared. And there was a man there where the airship was. And the man said that he had a device which could shrink the airship, and he put it in his pocket, sort of Henry Pym style, from the Avengers, right? Shit, I lost where I was. Where the hell was I? I was down there. Okay. Zoom in just a little. There we go. So that the airship was in his pocket, and the newspaper said that the actual editor of the newspaper itself was another witness to this, and that the pilot said, "Weaver et Roth Ebriscius," which, if you spell that backwards, says subscribe for the review. Right? Obviously a fake story. So that's the thing about these early, this first wave. A lot of newspapers back then, were not very, they didn't have a lot of journalistic integrity. So, there's a term, yellow journalism is a term that they used to use for these types of newspapers back then. Basically, tabloids is what we would say today. Like Weekly World News, sort of like National Enquirer style tabloids were reporting these stories. And a lot of them were, not above making up stuff in order to get readers. So obviously a lot of these are pretty ridiculous and not very, accurate. I do want to show you guys, however, a couple of, let's see, we'll just put this over here so that you can see it. I do want to show you a couple of images from this time. So this is one from one of the Phantom airships. You can see this is a artwork that was in a newspaper. Looked something like this. This is sort of like a blimp. It's got paddle wheels on it. There's lights shining out of it, blah, 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 right? Here's another one from that time, which sort of looks like an airplane. Remember that airplanes were not actually invented until, what was it, 1911? The Wright brothers, right? So this was a good, decade and a half before we actually had airplanes. But there was a lot of experimentation out then, and they did have things like gliders and stuff like that. So you can kind of see how it was like, it's sort of like, what people would expect a flying ship to look like. Something like this at that time, right? Let's move that back out of there. Oh, wait a minute. Did you guys even see that? I think you did, right? Okay, I hope so. Anyway, wait, is it actually showing it when I bring it over to that other... Hang on a second, folks. When I actually bring it over here, does it actually show it? Or am I still streaming? I'm still streaming, right? Okay, good. Because I'm not seeing it appear on the screen there, so maybe you're not even, seeing that. What the hell's going on here? Why is it doing this? How about now? Let me see. Does it do it now? No. No, it's just actually showing Kitra. Oh, crap. Okay, so I actually need to... Let's just do that again. Let me turn on my laptop window. There we go. Now you can see it. Okay, that was weird. It was, not showing it before. Anyway, so yeah, this is what you would say, like, just to kind of show you again, right? Here's the airship. Yeah, okay, now I see it. Okay, before I was wondering why I didn't see it on the screen. Here's like, what I was saying before, the airship with the paddle wheels and stuff like that, blah, blah, blah. Here's one that looks like an airplane, that you don't, they didn't have airplanes in 1897, obviously. It was like, not until 14 years later. But you can kind of see it's what the people from that time would have envisioned a plane to look like, right? Let's get that out of there. Okay, sorry about that. I'll have to remember to, actually keep that going, right? Let's go back to our notes. Okay, let's see here. So yeah, this was sort of the first. I mean, I do think the one story from the Colonel there with the warbling chicken men actually does sound very interesting, but there is a chance that that story was made up as well. But it's just kind of, I think that one just sort of shows, like, I mean, it seems to be too much of a coincidence to me that he actually shows like a metallic craft that a lot of the elements of his story are very close to modern UFO abduction stories, and they seem a little bit too close to me. So out of all of those that we went over, I would say that one is the most credible. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe it could have been just another sensational tabloid story in order to, get readers. That's the problem with this particular, like, point in ufology. Right, there's no really good evidence. There's no photos, anything like that. There is a photo of supposedly of an airship, which a phantom airship, which turned out to not be real. That was like a hoax photo. So anyhow, so then time goes on, right? We're gonna jump ahead to the 1940s and World War II. There were reports of what were called Foo Fighters in World War II, which were strange lights in the sky that pilots reported seeing while flying over Europe, right, and Japan. And they would basically exhibit all of the same, sort of behaviors of UFOs that we see today. Incredibly fast, able to do things that conventional aircraft can't do, like, accelerate to thousands of miles an hour, or just disappear, turn on a dime, just like accelerate really fast, stop, turn on a dime, flip upside down, all kinds of stuff. Stuff that planes at that time and even today are not capable of actually doing. Right. And of course, during that time, it was the war, so the Allies thought that this was like a German super weapon, right? There are also reports of German, like, Nazis and stuff creating UFO style flying disc type craft, but, we'll cover those in a different stream. It wasn't until after the war that they found out that the Germans and Japanese also saw the Foo Fighters and thought the same thing, thought that they were instead secret Allied weapons. As far as I could tell, there's no reports of an actual Foo Fighter destroying an aircraft or attacking an aircraft. It seems like they were just mainly observing. Now, of course, what could these things actually be? Well, there's a million different explanations. They could just be other aircraft. They could be mirages. You do get things like ice crystals in the atmosphere and stuff like that. Although, like, when you hear that as an explanation, it kind of sounds like BS, doesn't it? Oh, they're really ice crystals? Oh, it's swamp gas, reflecting off of Venus or something. Right. But that kind of thing really happens. You really do get things like mirages and sundogs and reflections in the sky from, shadows reflecting onto ice crystals, stuff like that. That really is like, um, plausible explanations for some of these things. Ball lightning is another one. If you've ever seen videos, look up videos of ball lightning on YouTube. It's kind of amazing what it looks like. It actually looks like a UFO. right? Like, and it was something that for a long time they never had evidence of. Of ball lightning, and then they finally like got it on video. It's kind of crazy looking stuff like that. So, you know, um, so these reports were coming in from both sides of the conflict there, right? And then in February 24th, 1942, we had what was called the Battle of Los Angeles, and this is when um, unidentified flying objects were seen over LA, and anti-aircraft guns actually opened fire on them. Right. So a little bit of background here. There was so this is less than 3 months after the United States entered World War II. Remember like the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor happened in December the previous year. So this is like February. So their tensions were pretty high. And there were actually attacks by Japanese subs on the American West Coast. They were sinking merchant vessels and stuff like that. And then actually, on February 23rd, the day before the Battle of Los Angeles, a Japanese submarine attacked a fuel depot in Santa Barbara, like an oil field, and fired 25 shells at this oil field and didn't do a lot of damage. They blew up a couple of storage tanks, and then they blew up a pump house and one of the oil derricks, right? But the intention was to not cause a lot of damage. It was mainly to spread fear among that the American West Coast could be invaded at any time, right? And that I didn't know that. That's actually kind of crazy. I had no idea that the Japanese actually succeeded in attacking California like that. That's kind of cool. Well, not cool, but that's kind of like a cool thing to learn, right? Like, I had no idea that that was even a thing, during World War II, that there was actually like attacks on the American mainland, right? So anyway, tensions were very, very high. And that day that people started seeing unidentified lights in the sky, which they thought could have been Japanese planes, so there was a lot of fear that there might be a bombing raid against one of the cities in California. And so a warning went out to lots of different cities in California that there could be an attack within the next 10 hours, right? On that day of February 25th, right? 24th, sorry. So tensions were really super high. And what happened was that there were more reports of lights in the sky. And then later that night at 7:18 p.m., air raid sirens went off, and they ordered a blackout of the city, because that's what you do when there's at that time when there was like a bombing raid. What they would do is like order a blackout, so that way there's no lights. So if they do it at night, like the planes don't know where the target is, right? This is like years before things like satellite imagery and night vision and that kind of thing. This really wouldn't work today, but that was the tactic back then. You just turned off all the lights and hoped they missed, right? That was the thing. And then so the alert was called off at 10:23 p.m. later that night. Then further on later that night at 2:25 a.m., the air raid sirens went off again, and then another blackout was ordered, and they started firing. And all told, they started firing. There was like 50 caliber machine guns, and then these sort of like very huge 12-pound anti-aircraft shells. That what they are, they're shells that you fire them off, and then they're designed to explode at a certain altitude. So you can like sort of predict like this plane flies at that altitude, and then you can measure and then set the shell to blow up like next to the plane. So even if you don't hit the plane, like shrapnel from the shell flies out and blows up the plane. Supposedly, it's sort of like like anti-aircraft kind of flak gun kind of things, right? And they ended up shooting over 1,400 shells at lights in the sky, right? And this went on all night, and actually a couple of people died because, when you fire guns up in the sky, the bullets come back down, right? So a couple of people got hit by friendly fire there and ended up buying the farm. Later on, they canceled it at around 7:21 a.m. And the official story is that the attack on the Battle of Los Angeles was an overreaction. That it was all due to misidentifying weather balloons, meteorological balloons, that kind of thing. And, it was a false alarm, right? So we have this picture. Let me just go back to my images. And we have this picture here of let's put that over here. This picture here of searchlights. This is a newspaper headline from the next day, February 26th, right? And we've got this picture of searchlights focusing in on something up in the sky, right? This ran in the newspaper, and if you look at it, kind of looks like a flying saucer, wouldn't you say? Let's make that a little bigger. Let's try to make that so we can zoom in on that. Sort of looks like a flying saucer. So this is an actual photo. The thing that we need to understand, though, is that this photo has been heavily retouched, right? So that was just a thing that they normally did in newspapers at that time, is that they would, in order to, especially for like a nighttime photo, in order to increase contrast, because it was just black and white newspapers and printing was all like primitive and shit, that they would basically airbrush stuff. So this photo is, it ends up looking like a flying saucer, right? But we don't really know what it was. We know there was something there, whether it was a balloon, whether it was nothing. We know that this is a real photo, and there really were searchlights focusing in on something that they were shooting at. We just have no idea what it was. Was it actually a weather balloon? Was it whatever? We can't take this photo as proof. That's the problem, right? Excuse me. Certainly kind of looks like it, though. Certainly looks like that could have been something pretty, extraterrestrial, right? Let's move that out of there. So, anyway, give me a second. Every time I go to the photos, I have to, reset back to, where my notes were. So, excuse me for a second. Okay. So, kind of interesting, though. I think that's interesting stuff. That's this, of course, has been used in popular culture and stuff. There was an X-Files episode about the Battle of Los Angeles. There's actually a movie called The Battle of Los Angeles that uses this photo in it. But, just, so it's interesting to think about, right? And it kind of thinks well, wow, what if they really were aliens and they were just this was the first contact, and then they just happened to come during a world war, and our first instinct of human beings was to fire at them, right? Kind of things gee, we may have screwed something up pretty bad, something to think about, right? So let's see, what time were we at? We started at 11:30. Let's go for a few more minutes and then we'll read some comments. So this leads us to the first major, what you would say, UFO sighting, right? Which is the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947. This is probably the most famous UFO sighting. This is the sighting which coined the term flying saucer, right? So Kenneth Arnold was flying. This was in June 24th of 1947, near Mount Rainier near Seattle in Washington. And he was flying to Yakima, Washington, on a business trip. And then he made a sort of a detour to go around Mount Rainier because there was a downed Marine Corps aircraft that had crashed there not that long ago, and there was a $5,000 reward for anybody who could find the wreckage. So he decided to make a bit of a detour and fly around there and see if he could, like, spot the airplane, right? And as he was flying at 9,200 feet up at 3 p.m. on June 24th, 1947. He sees a series of 9 flying metallic objects that the way he noticed them at first was because there were these bright flashes of light, right? And what it was is that the bright flashes of light was the sun reflecting off of these, flying objects, right? So he did some measurements and stuff, started like, tailing them as best as he could, but they were going way faster than him. He thinks they were going around, at first he said 1,700 miles an hour, but then sort of after taking some measurements and stuff, like, and some observations, revised that later to say 1,200 miles an hour, which is way faster than any aircraft in 1947 could possibly go. I mean, they did have jet airplanes and stuff in 1947, but they couldn't reach that speed at that time, right? He said that they were, from his estimate, they were around 140 to 280 feet long, so pretty huge, and that they were going, the way they were flying was sort of in a skipping motion, like how you would skip saucers over water, is what he said, like skipping a disc over water. Is the quote that he said. Years later, that's how he described it. Discs skipping over water. And that kind of led to the term flying saucer being coined after this encounter. Flying saucer, or newspapers would say flying discs, right? That's where that originally comes from. It comes from this, this sighting, right? Supposedly, the UFOs flew in a long chain, one after the other. And at first he thought it was a flock of geese that maybe was flying. Damn it, I just lost my... See, that's the problem here. This is too confusing. I keep losing my place when I just want to move it down a little. There we go. He said he thought it was a flock of geese, but he realized that they were flying way too fast, and plus, geese are not metallic or shiny like that. And they were weaving from side to side as they flew, and they would occasionally flip over, or they would sort of like fly, like they would like tip over and just fly like on their side, But the thing is that they would all do it simultaneously. So they'd be flying, and then all of them in unison would flip over, or all of them in unison would go edge up, so that they were flying edge up, that kind of thing. And they were weaving in and out, going around like mountaintops and through valleys, that kind of thing. So really fast is what they're doing. I mean, remember 1,700 miles an hour is like, super fast compared to his like little tiny ass propeller plane, right? And he kept watching them until they actually flew away because they were going so fast that he couldn't keep up with them, He said that they were convex shaped and very thin, although one of them was crescent shaped. There's pictures, just look up Kenneth Arnold and you'll see him like with a picture of a crescent shaped UFO. The crescent shaped one was in front and the convex shaped ones were behind, so that was sort of like maybe like a lead ship in the formation or something, right? And the thing is that this guy Kenneth Arnold was like not a kook or a crazy. He was like a professional trained pilot. He took measurements as best as he could. He rolled down the window of his plane to eliminate the possibility that they were reflections, or that it was like water on the inside of his canopy, something like that. Rolled that all down. He compared them best he could to landmarks, that kind of thing, and actually got some somewhat detailed measurements. So that's why we can kind of believe the measurements that he said. I mean, unless he was making it up or whatever. But the guy had credibility, right? And what makes this sighting more credible than a lot of other UFO sightings is that there are other witnesses who came forward afterwards and said they saw the same thing. So, a man named L.J. Bernier out of Washington, Richland, Washington, which is 100 miles southeast of, 140 miles southeast of Mount Rainier, said that he saw three similar type objects right around the same time on the same day flying towards Mount Rainier. Another woman who was a woman named Ethel Wheelhouse, who was 60 miles north northwest of where Mount Rainier was, said that she saw the same nine flying objects as well. And then another guy, a member of the Washington State Forest Service, said that he saw the same objects at the exact same time as Kenneth Arnold did. So, pretty interesting stuff. This guy Kenneth Arnold sort of became like an overnight celebrity, and apparently his daughter said that they got something like 10,000 letters from people, all reporting seeing similar things in the sky, stuff like that. This led to, it was like after this there was sort of like this massive wave of UFO sightings, and this was the first one. But all of these people came forward saying that, yeah, one time I saw this and blah, 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 right? Sending him letters. He was getting constant phone calls. He was doing, you know, doing a newspaper article, like, articles and stuff, and interviews with magazines, that kind of thing. So he kind of got famous a little bit. And he sort of went on to become a bit of a UFO, like, investigator himself, Kenneth Arnold. Um, he investigated the Murray Island incident for the magazine Amazing Stories in the early 50s, right? Which he concluded that incident to be a hoax, and that's an interesting one too. If you want something, look it up. It's supposedly there was a UFO that came up out of the water and actually dropped some kind of material, which one guy said was pieces of metal, and then another guy said were lava rocks, and it like fell onto the deck of this like fishing boat and actually killed someone's dog, right? And the Air Force investigated that too. Supposedly, the two guys who were investigating that from the Air Force, they had samples of the metal that fell off the craft, and then their plane crashed and they both died, and the material was missing. Now, when you hear something like that in modern day conspiracy theory speak, usually somebody would conclude that means there was a cover up. Right? Oh, they had the material and then they mysteriously died. Sounds suspicious, right? Sounds very sus. At the time, their conclusion was that this was a hoax. And there was actually, like, the idea was the government was thinking of prosecuting the people who reported the hoax because it resulted in the deaths of two Air Force personnel whose plane crashed when they were out there investigating the hoax. Kind of the same way that, if you like say SWAT somebody and the SWAT team goes to a guy's house and kills him, you're held responsible for that. Kind of the same way. And they decided not to, and the conclusion was that this particular thing was a prank that just got out of hand, and they were not responsible for the deaths of these two Air Force people. So it's like, that's the thing you got to keep in mind. It's like, you don't jump to conclusions, because every single UFO paranormal website you go to that talks about the Murray Island incident jumps to that conclusion and says that, that it was a cover-up and these two guys were killed because they knew too much, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, it was an accident. It was an accident so much that the government was thinking of actually throwing two people in jail for it. Right? So keep that in mind. Yeah. And it's really kind of sad, though, just as a side note, to see that, when you actually look into these things, like things that you think are fantastic usually end up being mundane, especially when it comes to UFO incidents. Like, when you really start looking into it and and reading past the headlines and stuff, you find out that a lot of these things are like, Okay, that was made up. That one's a hoax. That one's made up. That story is not believable, etc., etc. So, anyway, so yeah, Kenneth Arnold went on to write several books. One called "Our Space Visitors Here" in 1948. Another one called "The Phantom Lights in Nevada," and then "Coming of the Saucers" in 1952. And so, he kind of like parlayed this into a career. But, that doesn't mean that his first sighting wasn't credible. Like his first sighting actually, I think, is one of the more credible UFO sightings from that time, right? Because shortly after this, there was this huge wave. Whether that was because of there actually was, UFO activity, or whether it was because it was sort of a mass hysteria thing, we don't know. That is a phenomenon that happens, though, and we even see it today, where a story gets reported, right, in the news, and then more people sort of come forward with similar stories, and then it seems like there's a wave of, whatever's happening, right? We see that happening today with things like, sexual harassment, for example, bigotry, reports of bigotry, stuff like that, assault, whatever, Um, for example, a good example of this is the currently in New York City, for example, Asian people are being assaulted like crazy because they're getting blamed for the pandemic. And one person comes forward, and then a bunch of other people start coming forward, and then you know, and it's sort of inevitable, especially when it comes to things like paranormal type stories, that you're gonna get cranks and weirdos and people making shit up, especially when it comes to the paranormal. You know, you're gonna get like just insane people who are looking for attention, or who think that the little green men are implanting microphones into their teeth or something, that are just gonna come forward with fantastic stories. So a lot of the reports that came after 1947 are most likely made up, but some of them probably are not. This sort of leads, of course, to Roswell, July 1947. This happens 1 month after the Kenneth, or not 1 month. Actually, yeah, about a month, because this Kenneth Arnold was in June, and then Roswell happened in 1947 July, right? Of course, you guys all know what Roswell is. It's the very most famous UFO story of all time. We won't get into it so much because I'm planning on covering Roswell in a separate um, stream, because there's so much to the Roswell thing that we could easily spend, 6, 7 hours on it. There's a lot that has developed out of Roswell. There's lots of interviews with actual witnesses who were there, etc., etc. So Roswell is not a beast which is easily tackled. But long story short, there was a supposed UFO crash in Roswell, New Mexico, which landed, and then this rancher went out and found the debris, stuff like that, and then there was an actual, supposedly four dead alien bodies, or one survivor, three dead bodies and one survivor, depending on who you talk to. Um, and of course, the thing that makes Roswell unique is that it was reported in the news the next day that the Air Force had captured a flying disc, right? So we actually have an image of that too. Let me just go to my images, and let's make this bigger. Okay, and it's going to make me scroll down, so I'll just have to do that anyway. Here we go. This is the supposed material that came from you know, the crashed UFO at Roswell. Now, the Army maintains that the Roswell UFO, of course, was a weather balloon, right? And if you look at this, if you look at the material that this major here, I can't remember his name, I don't have it written down, but if you look at the actual material that he's holding, kind of looks like a weather balloon, doesn't it? What do we have here? We have this sort of you know, um, foil like sort of sheet, that, if you've ever seen a weather balloon, that's what they're made out of. That kind of mylar, sort of like, metallic mylar, kind of outer, shiny outer coating, you know, like a mylar balloon. And it looks like it's torn and all that. And then you have these rods. See the rods here, and then there and there and there. Kind of looks like that might be the structure for a weather balloon, you know? Now, I'm not saying Roswell isn't true or that it didn't happen, but if this is the best evidence we have for it, the evidence is kind of saying weather balloon. Right? So, of course, this doesn't explain the alien bodies that were supposedly seen and the witnesses, all this other stuff, blah, 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 blah. All of that has kind of gone on. Let's move this out of here. That's all become part of UFO mythology. Supposedly the Roswell crash was taken to a secret base in New Mexico, which is now that we know as Area 51. One of the aliens actually survived and became somewhat of an ambassador, who was later known as the J Rod, right? And this is, depending on who you talk to, he either went home through a dimensional portal of some kind, or he died shortly thereafter, or he sort of like founded this kind of like underground base Men in Black kind of organization where there's like contact with like Nordic types and like reptilians. It's completely out there and convoluted. Here's the thing about this, right? We know that, for example, Area 51 is real. Area 51's real. Okay. You can get pictures of it on Google Earth, right? It's out there. It exists. A few years ago, a bunch of weebs from fucking 4chan like went to it and said that they were gonna like Naruto run their way into Area 51, and of course they never did it. Right? We know where it is. It's the best known secret underground UFO base in the world, right? But we don't know what's there. We don't know if aliens are real there, if they actually have flying saucers. There was another guy named Bob Lazar, for example, says that he worked there and that he saw alien spacecraft and blah blah blah, that kind of thing. There's other people on the internet who have, there's videos on YouTube where people are describing in intricate detail what the inside of the base looks like. Nobody has any proof of any of this. There's no photos of the inside of the base. There's no photos of the aliens or pictures of the spacecraft or anything like that. You would think that if, tens of thousands of people have worked at this base over the years, if it's still open, if this army base is open and it's been there since 1947, then that would mean that literally thousands of people have worked at this base over the course of 50 years. You're going to really keep all of them quiet? Especially about a UFO, It seems to me that somebody would have blabbed by now, especially if they've seen aliens. It doesn't seem like this is a secret that you can keep for 50 years, but who knows? I mean, not saying it's impossible, it just seems highly, highly unlikely. And without any actual real physical proof, we can't say one way or the other if any of it's actually true, right? I don't know. Maybe. I think it's plausible that at one time, there may have been a base there that may have dealt with aliens and such like that, and maybe they've moved it out since, because maybe it's at a different base now because Area 51 is kind of compromised. Like, who really knows? I mean, the thing about all this is when you start trying to think about all this shit logically, none of it makes sense. So, just have fun with it and don't actually stake your belief on anything. Right. So we will cover Roswell in further detail in a different stream. But that kind of got the ball rolling too. Just seeing that in the newspaper, a newspaper reported that a flying disc was captured by the army, kind of solidified into a lot of people's minds that this shit is real. And there was a massive wave of UFO sightings after this that extended into the 1950s. And then we have things like, the invasion of Washington, for example, where UFOs were found over the Capitol, you know, Washington, D.C., and where they were scrambling jets and all that. We'll cover that in another stream too, because that's actually very interesting. And it got, that's what sort of like began the I guess you would say first modern wave of UFO sightings, right? Let's read a couple of comments. Mm. Excuse me, my mouth is like dry. Let's read some comments before we go on, because then I want to talk about Marty and Betty Hill. But before we do that, let's see what we got here. Lots of comments in the stream. Let's see. Lewis the Hedgehog. Just to be fair, I don't think that people who say they were abducted are making it up. It really does not seem to me that this was something they chose. Um, as for they're doing it for attention, I don't think that's very well thought out. Oh yes, being surgically raped at night and everyone thinking I'm crazy to the point where it ruins my life. Sign me right up for that. Yeah, so the alien abduction thing, as we're gonna see, like with the case we're about to talk about, I think this one is credible. The Barney and Betty Hill one is credible. Like, but some of the stories are a little out there. You know what I mean? And the problem with it is like, well, the more fantastic your story, the less credible it is. So there's some people that I think have very credible stories, like Travis Walton, for example. If you ever seen that movie Fire in the Sky, his story seems to be somewhat credible. He's also got multiple witnesses to the story who saw it happen. You know, that could be pretty good. But then you are always going to get crazies. You're always going to get crazies. You're going to get people with psychological problems who are making shit up, who are delusional. You're going to get people who just want attention. Like, I mean, I know, like you just said, oh, I don't believe that, but it's true. There are people who will just make shit up to troll things. For example, the surgeon's photo. A good example of that. The surgeon's photo of the Loch Ness monster is fake. The most famous picture of the Loch Ness monster ever. It's fake, and we found out that it's fake, and then one of the guys who admitted it, 50 years later, admitted that it was fake. And why did he do it? Because he was trolling. Basically, he's doing what we would call trolling nowadays. There's all kinds of people out there who fake evidence for things like this. There was a few years back, there was a story I saw in the news about someone who claimed to have found have a body of a frozen Bigfoot in a freezer, and it turned out it was like a Halloween costume with like some chicken parts in it. So there's people that make stuff up all the time. So we can't really rule out the hoax, right? I personally think a lot of UFO contactees are hoaxes. People like Billy Meyer, for example. Billy Meyer is the fakest shit ever. I don't know if you've ever seen Billy Meyer. He's a guy from Switzerland, I think, who has one arm and claimed to be a contactee, which we'll do a whole stream about contactees too, because they're like really hilarious. Contactees are funny. I don't believe any of the contactees that I've reviewed, that I've seen or read about. I don't believe any of them are real. I think they're all making it up. These are the people who've claimed that, the Space Brothers are coming down from, Venus in order to usher in the age of Aquarius and all of this other bullshit, and then that way girls will want to have sex with me again. Like, seriously, it's very contactees are horseshit. Something to keep in mind: Scientology is a UFO contactee cult. That's true. Scientology is basically it's a UFO cult at its core. It's about how aliens came, thousands, if not, or millions of years ago, and implanted souls on the earth, and blah, 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 blah. It's complete bullshit. So this stuff can, people can fall for this shit. It's very, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to do a stream about that too, about UFO cults. UFO cults are ridiculous and hilarious and scary as well. So But I do think that there is some credibility to some of the claims that are out there, to some of the stories, right? Some of them, there actually is physical evidence as well. People have implants and stuff, like, in their bodies behind their ears. They have physical scars on their bodies of like weird stuff. Like, where did that come from? There's also a couple of abduction cases I read about where people got really sick afterwards, like radiation poisoning, that kind of thing. So, yeah, there I think there is, maybe some truth to some of it, but we got to keep in mind, like, it's always a good idea to be skeptical and just not believe everything you read and not believe everything you hear, and you know read a little bit about the people. Like, for example, Bob Lazar, like, he's the guy that worked at Area 51 and said that he worked on UFOs. I don't know about that guy. I don't know how credible he is. There's some things I read about him that say that he's the real deal, and other things that say that he's like, you know, maybe making it up, maybe embellishing. There's evidence that he actually did work there, but like everybody's denying it. But then they have a phone book with his name in it that showed that he actually did work there. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting. It's not enough to make a conclusion one way or the other, I think. But I do kind of tend towards the notion that there is like an alien phenomenon, and out of, like I said, out of all the paranormal stuff that you could read about, the whole like alien phenomena, the UFO phenomena, like, is the most credible to me as something that actually could exist, right? So anyway, went off on a tangent there. Sorry, folks. Um, Pony Throat. Hello, my name is Pony Throat. I'm a voraholic. Thank you, Pony Throat. Acknowledging is the first step towards, is the first step onto the road to recovery. Pony Throat, the universe is so big that it is unlikely aliens don't exist. Nevertheless, Pixar didn't happen. Exactly. Exactly. That's the stance that I take too. It's like, we can't say one particular claim or another is true without evidence. You just can't. You can personally believe something, or like to think that it's true, but you shouldn't try to claim there's actual truth to it without any physical evidence. That's the difference between a religion and science and a fact. That's the difference between a theory, you know, and an actual fact, is that there's evidence to support facts, and there's conjecture for theories. Of course, the term, the way the theory is used in a scientific way is much different than that. But you get my meaning. Like, I'm not trying to say that, oh, the theory of evolution or the theory of gravity are just theories. I'm not trying to say that. But I am saying, like, if you actually have evidence that something is true, then it's true. If you can, if you can reproduce it, if you can test something and reproduce it and measure it, that's a lot different than just speculation. And unfortunately, when it comes to aliens, everything that we're saying is just speculation until we have tantalizing bits of evidence. There's photographs which I think are authentic. There's other things like that, which I think could lend a lot to it and prevent it, in my mind, from being dismissed unilaterally as just being hogwash, you know. But unfortunately, none of it's conclusive. That's the problem, right? Let's see. Lusa Hedgehog. Heck, if you can prove that the abductions are something else to the point where this problem can be fixed, you would uh, be their heroes and possibly win the Nobel Prize. But if that's the case, then why is nobody doing it? And don't chalk it up to simple things like sleep paralysis or dehydration. What about those instances where people experience sleep paralysis or dehydration but didn't experience aliens? That's true. That's true. I can say that I actually did have sleep paralysis, or how do you pronounce this? Pronounce that. Sleep. God damn it! I can never pronounce this shit. Sleep. Uh, you know, paralysis, I guess, or whatever. That actually did happen to me once, and I saw some crazy shit. But yeah, it wasn't aliens. Yeah, it was, even kind of when it was happening, like I thought I was just dreaming or something. You know what I mean? Like I actually did the God damn it. Um, I'm not gonna try. I'm not gonna be able to pronounce it now. Paralysis. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, I did one time like wake up in the middle of the night and saw like a weird ghosty thing that was like on my chest, and was like scared the shit out of me. And but it wasn't like an alien. But I could understand though why people would chalk that up to it, because it was like, imagine the most vivid nightmare that you've ever had, like vivid nightmare that you would swear is true. That's sleep. That's what that is. That's what it feels like. The sleep paralysis thing, paralysis, whatever. That's what it feels like, And you can't move. That's the other thing too. So I sort of woke up in the middle of the night, saw this weird ghosty thing like right in front of me, like inches away from my face, and was not able to move, and was just, and then immediately you just start freaking out, and it's just like, holy fuck, what's going on? All I did was then I just closed my eyes, and then a few minutes later it was gone, and then that's when I knew that it wasn't like, right. I just closed my eyes, and like was just like fuck, and then open them up a few minutes later, and then there was nothing there. I'm like, oh shit, that must have been a dream. And I thought it was a dream, and then I read about the symptoms of that, and it fit everything. You get sort of this crushing panic that you know you start like really really panicking super hard, and that just makes the hallucination much more real. you know I would not, and the thing is, why I would think it's that also is because like I've done things like LSD before in the past and hallucinated that kind of thing. Like I've done hallucinogens, right, like years and years ago. That, like when you have hallucinations from a drug like that, at no point like did I ever think while I was tripping balls on acid that the shit I was seeing was real. Like never. You know, it's never like, I mean, I don't know about other people, but like whenever I would do hallucinogens or drugs like that, it was never to the point where I lost contact with reality. I never thought this is real shit. That I really am seeing, like, that plant over there move around and stuff. Like, no, no. It was all like I was still able to control myself, still able to determine what was real and what wasn't. And if you sort of like concentrate hard enough, you can make it go away. That's sort of what LSD is like. This wasn't like that. This was more like I had no control over it, and that's why I really like would say it's closer to a dream state, and that's kind of what sleep paralysis actually is. It's sort of like the part of your brain that's responsible for dreaming is still active while your conscious mind is awake, you know? And that's why you panic because you don't know what's happening. That's what it's like. So, yeah, I could understand how someone could have that experience and then think it was an alien abduction, but it's like it's not as detailed. That's the other thing too. Like at least when it happened to me, it literally only lasted maybe 15 seconds. You know what I mean? And reports of alien abductions are usually like, first off, they have like lost time, so they don't remember it until like days or even months or years later. And then they go like, well, hey, I was looking at my watch and it was 3 p.m. and then the next time I looked at it, it was like 5:30. What happened to the other 2.5 hours or whatever? That's something that happens. You experience that lost time. Sometimes there's physical evidence for it too. Like I was saying, people get weird scars or implants or that kind of thing. So you can't attribute all of that to just sleep paralysis. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can't. That's not just like no, no. You can't attribute physical evidence to that. So it's all very fascinating. It's all very fascinating, and I would say that maybe some reports of that kind of thing can be explained through sleep paralysis, but not all of it. Not, no way. Not every You know, this is, of course, you got to remember if what these people are saying is actually true and accurate. If they're not making it up, you know what I mean? If they're like being sincere and it actually happened to them, then that's um, let's see. I think I could just scroll down like that. That makes that much easier rather than trying to find myself again. Anyway, let's see what else we got. Um, Pony throat. Let's not kid ourselves into saying humanity is an advanced civilization. You're right. I take it back. We are a type zero sort of very primitive. We are very primitive if you think about it. We're kind of just, we've only had electricity for what? 130 years? You know? When did electricity come into wide use? Like we've had electricity, of course, since like what, the 1880s or whatever with Thomas Edison, right? But it didn't really come into wide use until what, 1930s, 1940s, somewhere around there. People didn't start really having electricity in their homes until after World War II. So we only really had computers for the last 50 years, I mean, they were precursors to the computers in the 30s and 40s, but it wasn't until the 1950s where we actually had what we would say is an actual computer, like a digital thing that could store information and make computations. Like, not really, we've only had space travel for not that long, and we can't really go that far, The moon is like the farthest we can go, really, at this point in time. So, yeah, I mean, I guess you would say we're a civilization. We're not maybe a technologically super advanced civilization. We're kind of, I mean, 100 years ago, people were driving Model Ts around. 100 years before that, it was all horses and buggies. So, you know, yeah, I think what we have done, humanity has come very far in a very short amount of time, though, if you think about it. Since it was really second half of the 19th century, since we started making super quick, rapid advancements. I think I think that's something that we can compliment ourselves for. You know, the fact that we've seemed to be learning things very, very fast. I mean, hell, we only had airplanes in 1911, so that's only 110 years ago. And then 50 years after the airplane, they're walking on the moon. Right? So, it looks like we're kind of catching up pretty quick. Let's give it another 500 years. See where, if humanity can survive 500 years. Let's see where we're at then. I think we'll be pretty close to I'm pretty sure in that amount of time we'll have things like warp drive. We'll have, interplanetary travel. Pretty sure in that amount of time we'll be able to figure this shit out. If we can prevent ourselves from killing each other or the planet from totally dying and all life on Earth being destroyed by global climate change, if we can get past that hump, I think we'll be pretty good. We'll either kill ourselves or we'll figure this shit out. And I don't know, kind of rooting for mankind. Of course, this is all going to happen centuries after we're all dead, so we're not going to be able to see any of this shit unless somebody invents like life extending nanoprobes in the next 20 years or something. Pretty sure all of this stuff is going to happen. You know what it is? The year I die, like I'll die, and then 5 minutes later they're going to be like, nanoprobes invented, can keep you alive forever. That's totally what's going to happen. I'm going to miss it by like half an hour or something. Oh well. Um, where are we at here? Lusa Hedgehog. Let's see. And if you ask why would aliens study us like wild animals, why do we do it? Why are we so different? Um, well, yeah. I don't think that there's any, you know, I think that's like a perfectly valid like reason for them to come here would be to study human beings like wild animals. Because we would do the exact same thing if we had spaceships and we went to some other planet and there were sort of like other advanced, life forms, but who were still more primitive than us, like technologically, then I'm pretty sure that our scientists here would want to study them, right? Like if we, like in Star Trek, Star Trek, they do the same thing. They have, you know, they study other civilizations who are not warp capable. That's like a common storyline in Star Trek. Happens all the time. I could totally see that. I mean, it's because, well, why? Because why not? That's what we're there for, is to learn about stuff. And, you learn about other civilizations just to know what they're all about. And, you know, it also sort of reflects on you. You learn more about yourself. That's why anthropology is a thing. Like, why do scientists study Stone Age tribes in Africa? So we can learn more about humanity and where we came from. And, what makes us different and what makes us the same and what we share and what we don't share and et cetera, et cetera. I think it would be fascinating, for example, to go to another planet, find another civilization of alien type beings, and learn all about what religion they have. If they have a religion, if they have one, what's it about? How similar is it to what the same things that we believe? How is that different? And then you can kind of see, like, for example, I have this idea. This is kind of a side note. Let's, after this one, we'll get back to the stream. But kind of a side note, I have this idea that there's a lot of duality in our religious imagery and concepts, because there's a lot of duality in nature, for example. You know, you have two hands, you have two arms and legs, 2 feet, right? Two eyes, two ears. There's man and woman, there's two sexes of, biological sex, right? There's a dichotomy, yin yang, right? There's the sun and the moon. There's lots of that. And you see that sort of dichotomy, that idea of duality pop up over and over and over again in religions around the world, you know? I think that's a common thing, that, this idea of there being like opposites and equals is a thing that it's like a very common trope when it comes to just religions all over the place. And I think it'd be interesting to see, like, for example, an alien civilization that, say, they didn't have two eyes, they had 6 eyes, you know, or they didn't have two biological sexes. Instead, they had 4 biological sexes. And then, would you see corresponding symbolism in their religions? Would they, instead of having this sort of good versus evil dichotomy that we have in a lot of human religions, would they instead have a much more shades of gray, for example? Instead of yin yang, would it be a 6-sided yin yang? Would they have a 6-sided cosmos? Instead of God versus Satan, would there be 6 different heavens or degrees? You know what I mean? Like 6 different hells, something like that. I think that kind of thing would be fascinating. And then through that, you kind of learn, like, about the psychology of human beings as well. It's like, oh, well, maybe we made these choices because we have these biological differences than them. So, stuff like that. I think that would be fascinating, and that would be definitely something we should learn about. And it makes perfect sense to me that alien beings would be doing the same thing to us. Maybe picking a few specimens up. Maybe doing some X-rays, right? Taking pregnancy tests, stuff like that, making see how we tick. Maybe getting some cattle, right? Tracking radiation, like, oh, we just dropped a bunch of like nuclear bombs and shit in the 1940s and 50s. Maybe they're tracking where that radiation's going through the food chain. That kind of thing, right? Maybe they're putting like implants in people's brains and stuff, and behind their ears, that way, the same way that we put radio collars on dolphins. Makes perfect sense to me, and it makes perfect sense that they would treat us like animals, because we're not their equals, right? So we wouldn't have rights. You don't give rights to a baboon, right? You don't give rights to a whale or something like that when you're studying it. Not really. Although there are people that want to give animals rights, and maybe they should have rights, but still, this is what it's like here, just in our civilization, in our society. Animals don't have rights. You do whatever the fuck you want to them, right? Well, it makes perfect sense that they would see us in the exact same way that we see a dolphin. Maybe we don't exterminate them. Maybe we do take steps to keep them from going extinct, whatever. But at the same time, if you just pick one up and, you can pick one up whenever you feel like it. You don't have to ask its permission. Right? So, makes perfect sense to me. Anyway, let's see. We're at 1 o'clock. Let's go through some more of the stuff, and then at the end we'll read some more comments. Raph, hey, what's up, dude? Great to see you. And Dynacat, great to see you too. Sean Nillabud, thank you for joining also. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about Barney and Betty Hill before we end this, right? So, who are Barney and Betty Hill? They were an interracial couple who, in September 20th of 1960, reported what is most likely the most famous UFO abduction case, right? Now, there were reports of UFO abductions before them. In particular, a guy named Antonio Villas Boyas in South America. He's the guy that was abducted by aliens and then, had sex with an alien babe. We'll talk about him someday. But Barney and Betty Hill are famous for a couple of reasons, because the tropes that you see in this abduction case end up becoming sort of like the staple for what millions of, and well, I don't know if it's even millions, but possibly hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people would say later on. The same kind of tropes would pop up over and over and over again. The missing time, that's something that they encountered. Hypnotic regression, being abducted and forced onto a ship without their will. Telepathic communication is another thing that they reported. And medical experiments on them. As well as the aliens themselves, the alien gray. These were one of the first reports of what we know as the typical big-eyed, big-headed alien gray. That comes from Barney and Betty Hill. Right. So, here's the story. They were driving home from vacation. They were at Niagara Falls. And they were driving home to Portsmouth. And the abduction took place just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire. And what happened is that as they're driving along at night, Betty Hill sees a very unusual bright star just below the moon. And it looked like to her a shooting star, except it went up instead of down. And she thought that was unusual. And it kept getting brighter and brighter. So they decide to stop their car to take a look at it because they had some binoculars. Because, they were at Niagara Falls, so they're looking at the falls through binoculars, right? And then, so they decide to stop, check this thing out, and then also to walk their dog, which was with them, right? And they were looking at the, oddly, Betty was looking at the light. She thought it was an oddly shaped craft with multicolored lights around it. Barney looked at it. He thought it was an airplane. But then it started to rapidly descend towards them, but without changing direction. So normally an airplane would have to turn around. This didn't turn around. It just suddenly started coming at them. So they get back in the car and they start driving away from it, right? And they continue to watch as it kept getting closer and closer and closer. They get to Indian Head, New Hampshire, and 1 mile south of that. And the UFO rapidly descended and stopped over their vehicle, about 80 to 100 feet above their vehicle, right? Which scared the crap out of them, of course, obviously. They stopped the car. Barney gets out. Barney has a pistol, so he's armed, right? He's not going to take no shit from nobody. He gets out of the car and he's looking at this thing through his binoculars with a pistol in his pocket, ready to fucking throw down if you know, it goes south. And he said that he could see on the UFO that there were portholes on it, and he could see 11 figures in the portholes. And they actually seemed to notice him. They seemed to be looking at him. You know, of course, it's only 80 feet above their car, so yeah. And all of them except one move away and start going towards this um, panel that's on the side of the spaceship, right? So then what happened is that, oh, and they were all wearing black uniforms with black caps. And the caps were sort of like military caps, right? And he heard in his head a message, which is presumably telepathic, this message, that said, stay where you are and keep watching. So he does the opposite of that. They get back in the car and they book it, right? You know, and he says to his wife, they're going to capture us. So they try to get the hell out of there. And they hear this rhythmic series of beeps and buzzes, which, according to him, sounded like were reflecting off of the trunk of their car, right? And then they sort of had this kind of altered state where everything dulled for a minute, like this altered state of consciousness, where they sort of like lost track of what was happening. And then after that, they found that they had traveled 35 miles away from where they were, but they only have sort of vague, spotty memories of what actually happened. They recall making a sudden, sharp, unplanned turn and encountering a roadblock, and then also observing what they thought was a fiery orb in the road. And that's all they could remember. So they get home, and, you know, they're unnerved by all this, right? They go to sleep. You know, they want to just, like, put this all past them. There were some strange things that Betty said that she was compelled to do. For example, she insisted that their luggage be kept near the back door instead of in the house, like in the main part of the house. Their watches broke. They never worked after that. They couldn't get their watches fixed after that. The leather strap to Barney's binoculars were broken somehow, and he couldn't remember how they broke. His shoes were scuffed, like he was wearing his like best dress shoes, and they had weird scuffs on them. He didn't know how that happened. Betty's dress was all torn and damaged, and the next day it had a strange pink powder all over it, which she didn't keep any. She put that out she put it on a clothesline, and all the powder blew away. And then she threw the dress away, but then thought better of it and took it out of the trash. So her dress actually has been examined by several different laboratories over the years in order to find any evidence of this pink powder that was on there. As far as I can tell, nobody's found any evidence of it, though. And then there were these little discs that were these sort of circles that were scratched into the car's trunk that weren't there before. And if they took a compass and put it over these circles, when they move these spots, and when they put the compass over the spots, then the needle would spin around all crazy. You know, like they were magnetic or something. Right. Anyway, so that was really freaky. And then Betty starts having these dreams a few days later, right? And she starts writing them down. And she's having these dreams about strange little men that were short that were doing like medical experiments on her and stuff, right? Like she's having like nightmares. And this went on for 5 days, and then the nightmares stopped, but not before she started writing them down. So years later, they decide that, this is really weighing on them. and especially the missing time part and how they got 35 miles away without realizing it. So they go to a hypnotic regression therapist, right? Which this is a very controversial thing. You know, hypnotic regression therapy is often used when people have trauma. You'll see like victims of like people who are raped, things like that. They'll go to hypnotic regression therapy. The thing about it is that it's not 100% reliable. There have been cases of, for example, people having false memories implanted, you know, that kind of thing. So some people say it's super reliable. It's not. Yeah, it's not 100% right. But still, this particular case though seems a little legit to me, right? Anyway, under hypnosis, they sort of start getting some details about what actually happened during the abduction, and so Barney says that the binocular strap broke when he ran away from the UFO. He's looking at it, and he runs back to his car, and that's when the strap broke. Under hypnosis, he recalled this, and so they're driving away, and then he feels compelled to pull the car over somehow. And this is after he already, when his conscious recall, said that he had that telepathic message, right? So he's sort of like being telepathically compelled to stop the car and get out, right? So they do that. They stop the car. And he sees 6 people standing in the dirt road, right? And 3 of them, like when they stop the car, 3 of the 6 people approached the car, and they telepathically told him not to be afraid. And the aliens were the typical gray aliens that we would see. Big heads, sort of like really huge black almond-shaped eyes, which they describe as wrapping around the sides of their heads. So they're not the big, huge circle type eyes, but they're sort of like pointed, kind of, sort of, you know. Well, they go off into points which go around the side of the head, like that. Short, about 4 feet tall, each of them, right? You know what a gray looks like. That's basically what they were. They approach the car. They say, "Don't fear us." However, Barney was still anxious. And the leader tells Barney to close his eyes. And so he closes his eyes, of course. And he says they often stared into his eyes. And he said things like, he kept going back under hypnosis. The eyes, they're there in my brain. That's the thing that he said. Then they go on the ship. They were taken onto the ship, and they were separated. And he was escorted into a room by himself by 3 of the men. And he was told to lie down on a rectangular examination table where they took off all his clothes and start doing some examinations, right? A cup-like device was put over his genitals to do some type of test. He thinks it was to extract semen, which is something that a lot of later abductees would say the same thing. There's always a lot of female abductees would say that they would do things like extract eggs, and male abductees would say they would do things like extract semen. Right. So he was also compelled afterwards, after he got home, to examine his genitals, and he didn't know why. So there was definitely some little bit of hanky-panky kind of, bad Uncle Touchy stuff going on there in the spaceship. They scraped his skin, peered in his ears and mouth, and Betty said that they came in to her and were pulling on her teeth. And she asked them why, and they said it's because Barney's teeth are removable. And it's because Barney had dentures. So they wanted to see if Betty had dentures. So The aliens didn't know what dentures were. That's interesting. Um, so yeah, they were counting. Apparently, he said they inserted a probe into his anus, anal probe. This is the first, you know, report of that as well from alien abductees. And then also said he felt like they were counting his vertebrae. Right. Betty's sort of was very similar to this, same kind of tests, that kind of thing. She said that they took a long needle and punctured her abdomen with it, and when she asked what they were doing, the aliens said it was a pregnancy test. This is interesting because at that time, the what they were, basically the idea was that they were taking embryonic fluid from the womb in order to test it. And at that time, that procedure was unknown. Like that was not a thing that when they did a pregnancy test, they would usually look for hormones in your urine. But this is actually a medical technique which has been developed since then. So that's kind of interesting. She said that she had conversations with the person that she thought she calls the leader, who was the only one that, like, apparently there was only one that would speak to them at any given time, and that the leader showed her a book. And originally she had permission to take it home with her, but then another like alien came in and basically convinced them to not do that. Right. So apparently the idea was in the beginning she was going to take this book with her, and then yeah, that another alien objected to this, and then the leader said, "Okay, well we're going to remove your memories." And Betty said, "No, don't remove my memories, whatever." And she wanted to keep the book, and they wouldn't let her. They wouldn't let her have it. She described the writing as sort of like pictograph kind of things, like similar to say like Japanese, something like that. Not really an alphabet as far as she could tell, but who knows? And supposedly the writing was the way the writing is that a one symbol could have lots of different meanings. So if you were to have, say, a symbol for the Earth, then that symbol would not just mean the word Earth, but it would mean everything about the Earth. Like everything, right? All the people, the animals, the ecology, everything, minerals, whatever, right? The history of mankind, all of that would be communicated by one symbol. And that's kind of how she said they described it to her, right? So obviously she couldn't read it. The really interesting thing about Betty's account is that she says she saw a star map, and we actually have pictures of that. Let me go to the my images again and make my stuff big. Drag that over here. Scroll down. So this is what they said the ship looked like, right? That it was sort of a disc kind of thing. This is like her sketch that she sketched, right? And there were windows, and then when it went to land, these sort of wing type things slid out from the sides with red lights on the ends. So pretty detailed. This is the star map that Betty said she saw, and supposedly this one here is the Earth. This one way over here on the far left. And these are other stars these are the main planets where the aliens come from, and then these sort of dotted lines are where they've made expeditions to, and our star is one of the expeditions that they go to, right? Pretty interesting stuff. There is, of course, a UFO researcher who claims that this has been mapped to existing stars, and according to this map, then the aliens come from Zeta Reticuli, which is a close by star. Of course, we don't really have any actual proof that they really are from Zeta Reticuli, or even that Zeta Reticuli has, as far as I can tell, any planets. I wasn't able to look that up before this, so if anybody, if I'm wrong about that, and if they have found exoplanets around Zeta Reticuli, then I apologize, but still, very interesting stuff. Um, she said that she thought that she heard them speaking to each other in sort of a verbal mumbling language, but when they spoke to her, it was telepathy. She described it as thought transference, is the words that she used. Um, but they also said that neither of them, Barney or Betty, ever saw their mouths move. So that's some interesting stuff too. Let's see. Then afterwards, Barney recalled being escorted from the ship back down and into his car, and then he watched the ship leave. And he remembers another light appearing and then thinking to himself, oh no, not again. But that light was just the moon. So, pretty traumatic experience for both of them, you know. And this is not, like you said there, Lewis, how you alluded to this. This didn't seem to be a thing that either of these two people made up to get attention. In fact, it seemed to be something that they seemed to be truly traumatized over it. And like I was saying, Betty had nightmares afterwards. There was a strain on their marriage after this. It was seems to be something that they most definitely didn't invite and weren't very happy about. And they were only compelled to get regression therapy years later because it was like fucking up their lives, right? So um but yeah, that is basically where the notion of the current UFO abduction comes from. So there are literally thousands of stories in the years since of people reporting these same types of abductions, and they all have the same tropes as that. The missing time, the medical experiments, the big-headed aliens with super huge eyes, you know, um, telepathic communication. You know, a lot of the times the people will be sort of like teleported through walls and stuff like that. So people report that it happens inside of their bedrooms and that they just go right through the wall. They don't have to go outside a door or anything. Sometimes people report that the ship will actually land and there'll be like a ramp and the aliens will escort them up through the ramp. A lot of the times people feel like they're not in control of their bodies. And that's another thing that Barney and Betty Hill sort of said, that they were kind of like in a dazed state where they were sort of compelled to obey, even though their emotions, they're freaking out, scared as hell. They still sort of didn't put up much in the way of resistance. Remember, Barney was armed. He could have like started shooting at these people, and he didn't. He could have started like firing. You know, defending himself. He had a pistol. He didn't fire his pistol. Right. So, why? You'd think if you saw aliens and you had a gun, then yeah, you've come there to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and you're all out of bubblegum, right? You think that would be the first thing on your mind. But for some reason, the thought of defending himself with lethal force did not enter his mind like that. And you can only sort of speculate as to why, but that's the notion that a lot of people report, that they're not exactly in control of their minds. And then also, of course, the missing memories and the missing time afterwards is something that they all report too. They all have memories that disappear and little lingering clues and nightmares afterwards. So pretty amazing stuff. I mean, the thing about it is that, like we were saying before, it's pretty obvious that some of the reports that have come after this are probably not real, but all of them, kind of hard to dismiss it when literally thousands of people are saying the exact same thing. you know I mean, I just think that it shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. I think it's it's definitely something worth researching and thinking about that, and leaving the possibility open that there may be some truth behind it. But like Mr. Ponythroat said earlier in the stream, Pixar, it didn't happen, right? We also should not draw conclusions from any of this because it is all ultimately speculation, and that's what that's unfortunately where we're at right now. Currently, I mean, there's UFO pictures that get shared around the internet all the time. There's stories that get shared around the internet constantly. We're sort of in the golden age of all of this stuff because a photo can get taken, some of them which I think are very convincing, and it could get spread around instantly all over the world, but that can also lead to lots of things like hoaxes and stuff. And once again, everybody's got a computer that can run fucking 3D Studio Max on it or whatever, and you could easily produce phony baloney evidence. So we got to remember we can't just take anything we see on the internet, any new evidence that comes out, any new UFO photo or video, can't take it at face value. Always got to leave open that possibility that somebody might have faked it, unfortunately. So, but it's interesting stuff. I do want to talk more about this kind of thing, but there's one more thing that I want to talk about before we move to reading some more comments before we end it for today. I do want to show you a couple of things, right? And I want to make this point because I think it's worth making this point. So, the modern UFO phenomenon started, like we said, in 1947 with Kenneth Arnold, right? Flying saucer, Kenneth Arnold. This is weird science wonder stories from November 1929. Okay, so this is 20 years before Kenneth Arnold. We have this notion in popular culture of a flying disc-like craft with aliens in it. This particular ship, this actually looks like a pretty cool story. It's a flying saucer flies up. It's got like a building in its hand. Right. 1929. So that's 20 years before Kenneth Arnold. That's 20 years before flying disc, flying saucer became part of the normal UFO lexicon. This is June 1939. Thrilling wonder stories about Martians, usually aliens from another planet, kidnapping some people, putting them in a cage, and filming them with, I don't know why they would have like film reels and shit, but whatever. Kind of not exactly a gray alien, but they are big-headed, small-bodied little people with bug eyes. That was sort of the conception of, people would say Martians before. They would call aliens Martians back then. Back in the 20s and the 30s, the Flash Gordon era of science fiction. That was your usual bug-eyed alien with something like this, right? But not a pretty big leap, wouldn't you say, from this sort of huge-eyed, giant-headed, brained alien thing to the typical alien gray. November 1930, astounding stories of super science, alien spaceship, landing invaders, of course, on ropes or whatever, coming down, fighting people, So that trope, that alien invasion trope, is a lot older than you think. This all predates Kenneth Arnold. This predates Roswell. This predates all of this, right? Astounding super stories of super science. This one is from the 1930s, sometime. I don't have the exact month. Weird tentacled alien things with huge eyes coming down, abducting people. Another one, 1930s, wonder stories. It's got a sort of a craft, a disc-shaped craft, the Man from Beyond, right? Kind of looks like a UFO, wouldn't you say? 17 years before the first modern UFO sighting. Here we go. I think this one kind of says it all, right? Thrilling wonder stories. Giant bug-eyed aliens with huge heads, giant eyes, shooting a guy here, abducting somebody for nefarious purposes, right? The point I'm trying to make with all of these, the point I'm trying to make here is that it was not even in 1947 the idea of people, creatures living on another planet coming here in spaceships was not an unfamiliar thing in the public consciousness. Okay. Before the first, this is 20, 30 years, or well, more like 20 years before people started seeing these things in the sky and claiming they were real. They were also already a big part of pop culture, right? I think that's something that we shouldn't ignore, you know? The idea that people were already familiar with the, I mean, we had 1933, the War of the Worlds, broadcast, right? That was a thing that, caused like a major freaking panic. People thought that, you know, Orson Welles' broadcast, people thought it was real. People were calling the police, you know, getting down, hunkering down into bunkers and stuff, loading their shotguns, waiting for the Martians to show up, right? H.G. Wells, his book War of the Worlds was published in 1897, right around that first wave of phantom airships. In fact, that was exactly the exact same time as the phantom airship wave, right? Edgar Rice Burroughs was writing about, you know, Tharks and on Mars with the Princess of Mars and his series of stories about John Carter on Mars. Which, if you've never read them, they're actually really good. John Carter on Mars is kind of awesome. It's sort of like Conan the Barbarian, except on Mars and with guns and with Martians. Pretty good stuff. He that first story that he wrote was published in 1912, right? So yeah, these tropes had been around for a long time. Before any of this, before people started claiming that they were actually seeing them in real life. The whole idea of little green men coming and abducting people, of stealing cattle, of invading the world and carting people off to be eaten or whatever, or turned into slaves, that kind of thing. That was very much already an established science fiction trope for decades before these things, before the actual, UFO waves started hitting. We can't underestimate that. There is a connection there, you know, the same way that people today, a vampire movie comes out, people claim they see vampires. Same kind of thing, right? So, something to be aware of. Now, I'm not trying to say that it's all made up bullshit. I'm not trying to say that, because I do believe UFOs are credible, you know. But we have to admit, when things are looking fishy, this is something that should be considered. The influence of pop culture on the UFO phenomenon should not be underestimated. You know, we can prove that by how we know that this is actually an effect, and that it actually does have an effect, because all over the country now, all over the world, when people see aliens, they see alien grays, right? Didn't used to be like that. Back in the 40s and 50s, and well, not 40s, but the 50s and 60s and 70s, right? When people would see aliens, they tended to see different types of aliens depending on where they lived in the world. So, if you lived in the United States, you usually saw a short, big headed, alien gray kind of thing, something similar to that, right? If you lived in Europe, you would see the what is called the tall Nordic type. These are usually people, white skinned people with glowing eyes and blonde hair, who are usually 6, 7, 8 feet tall, and most of the time depicted as benevolent. that's who you would see. If you lived in South America, you would see small, hairy dwarfs, right? Um, Dwarf type aliens with either long beards, long arms, or covered in shaggy hair. If you lived in Asia, like in the Soviet Union or something, you would usually see really large, super muscular type aliens, like human beings that looked like human beings that were super large and would be like, you know, blue or something like that. Big blue, extremely buff, right? Those types of that's what they tended to see. And in the Far East, China, Japan, Cambodia, places like that, they would see very, very small aliens. There's reports of people in Japan seeing aliens that are 6 inches tall coming out of very miniature spaceships, right? Nowadays, everybody everywhere sees the alien gray, the Zeta Reticulans, right? That's everywhere. That they see those, they see reptilians. We'll talk about them one day. They'll see what's called mantis aliens as well, right? These are reported all around the globe now, right? That didn't start happening until the 1980s. That didn't start happening until after Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out. In, I think, what was it, 1979 that came out? Or was it 1981? Something like that. Then everybody sees grays. Now it's worldwide because, it's just entered the popular, like, consciousness, the pop culture. So if you ask any given person in the world now to describe what an alien looks like, they're going to describe to you an alien gray, big head, black eyes, gray skin, you know, usually wearing like a one-piece uniform, something like that, coming out of a flying saucer. That's another thing too, that spacecraft were much different before. People would see rockets, you know, people would see rockets, they'd see strange looking airplanes, stuff like that. Nowadays, they tend to see either black triangles or flying disc type things, right? That's another thing that's kind of become uniform over the years. It's like, tends to be flying black triangles nowadays, you know. So we can't discount the fact that ideas populate through the collective conscious like that, and that could very well be influencing what some of these reports are, right? All stuff to think about. I still think though it's very credible, and I think next time I want to go through what I think the next stream we do on the subject, which I don't know if it'll be next week or if it'll be sometime in the future. The next time we talk about UFOs, I do want to sort of examine what I think are the most credible UFO evidence, photos, stuff like that, of stuff that I think could be credible, right? And then, I also want to do a stream or two on contactees, people like Billy Meyer, George Amansky, those types of people, because that stuff's fucking hilarious. It's hilarious as hell, and it's funny, and, the problem is people think that shit's real. Contactees are not real. Those guys are not real at all. It's total bullshit. Anyway, guys, let's read some more comments, and then I gotta end this because I'm hungry. Let's see here. What do we got here? More comments. Where did we end off anyway? Wow, there's a lot of comments this time. Okay. Lewis a Hedgehog. In other words, there is a difference between being skeptical and irrational. We are not going to solve this problem by sticking our heads in the dirt. We might as well say the gods did it. Besides, it's not like all the evidence is captured by drunken idiots. A lot is captured by members of the aviation authority and or military. People who are carefully selected for their mental and physical awareness in addition to the most advanced sensor equipment in the world. Yes, exactly. That's the thing, is exactly what you're saying, man. Not everybody who sees an alien as some drunk hick off in the backwoods of Kentucky or something, blitzed out on moonshine. No, there's been hundreds of reports from very credible witnesses, from military pilots, radar like readings, stuff like that. There was what's called the Washington, the invasion of D.C., where you know UFOs are seen over the White House like multiple times, and then they scramble jets, and then the UFOs go away, and then they come back, and then they scramble jets, and then the UFOs go away. There was like all kinds of stuff like that happened in 1952. You know, and that was actually true shit that happened. And why would they scramble jets to intercept them if they didn't have evidence they were there, like radar readings they were there, right? You know, so I do think there is, and I think there's even some photographs from around that time which are very plausible. There's this one case in Brazil, for example, which is probably the most plausible UFO sighting, like besides next to like Kenneth Arnold's. You know, I do think Kenneth Arnold's sighting actually is extremely plausible because he was not, the guy's not a kook, Kenneth Arnold, from what I can tell. He wasn't an attention seeker. He wasn't insane. You know, he was highly trained, ex-military pilot, right? And, had, hundreds of hours in the air, knew what he was doing, knew what he was looking at. And there's also collaborating witnesses, not collaborating witnesses who saw also the same things around the same time. I think his is very, very plausible. So, yeah, for sure. There is definitely good evidence that UFOs are, that some of the sightings at least may actually have happened, right? Let's see. Pony throat. No one ever brought a blimp to a battle. A blimp is a zeppelin without a metal frame inside and around the balloon. Both have baskets underneath. Oh, you're talking about the Battle of Los Angeles? Yeah, that's the thing. If it was a blimp, they would have just blown it away, right? Those things don't have armor, right? Airships are faster than most people assume, around 80 miles an hour. Yeah, I didn't know that. But the thing is, when it comes to a flying machine, 80 miles is not that fast. So you think about most airplanes you see in the sky are traveling at like 300 miles an hour, something like that, right? Pretty damn fast, but they can take a little while to go across the sky. It's because they're so high up. Most they're traveling miles up in the sky. So, when you see something really going super fast, like a jet or something, it's like you can tell, like things hauling ass. But blimps don't go that fast. Yeah, I mean, 80 miles an hour still is not, fast enough to just like fly away out of sight, especially when it's like 12,000 feet in the air. So, let's see. Lewis the Hedgehog. There may be some fakes out there, but how do you know they all are? That's the thing. We don't know. We don't know they're all fake. And I don't think that they're all fake at all. I mean, I think a lot of them probably are. Or rather than being fake, I think a lot of UFO sightings probably could be explained by mundane explanations. Things like sun dogs, things like, mirages, weather balloons. I even on my channel have UFO sighting that I recorded on my channel. There's about 2 years ago I put it up, so check it out if you want. And it's just of this weird dot flying around. Someone in the comments told me it's a weather balloon, and I'm like, really? Because if you look at it, it makes weird movements. Like, it makes this huge J sort of movement. Like, I'm like, do weather balloons really move like that? And the dude in the comments is like, yes, they do. And I'm like, really? I'm surprised. It doesn't seem logical to me, but I don't know. I'm not an expert. So I didn't delete it. It's still there. I mean, I guess it could have been a weather balloon, It seemed to be moving a little erratically for a balloon, but I don't know. Maybe there was wind way up there or something. Who knows? So I do think that some of the, some of it can be explained through that mundane, and maybe the people reporting it are being sincere. You know, I do think a lot of it can be. We can't rule out the possibility of fakes. I think that you should keep in mind that people like to fake stuff, right? People like to, which we'll get into that when we talk about Billy Meyer. Billy Meyer's photographs are fake as hell. If you've ever seen, I'm going to look one up just to kind of reiterate that point. Let's just take a look at some Billy Meyer stuff. I don't want to kind of like UFO. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Meyer UFO. This is just to kind of go through Google image search. This is Billy Meyer right here, this dude with a beard. And here's some of the photos that he's taken. Like that. That's a Billy Meyer photo. That's the fake. It's fake. It's totally fake, right? Here's another Billy Meyer photo. It's basically a little model on a string. Here's another one. It's a model on a string. Here's another UFO photo from Billy Meyer. It's like the photo. This is a little. What we're looking at here, is a little bush, and then the UFO is like tied to a branch on the bush. There's a whole bunch of these. See, this is not. It looks like a full-size tree. It's not. It's a little tiny bush, right? He's got all kinds of shit. Like, so yeah, Billy Meyer is fake as hell, and that's just an example of people like to do shit like that. People like to get attention. Some people just, for whatever reason, in Billy Meyer's case, he's created sort of like a fucking UFO cult around it. It's very interesting. We'll do a whole stream on him. So you can't discount that stuff either. You keep an open mind, right? But don't be so open that you fall for, baloney, right? That you fall for things that are obviously not true. So, anyway, let's see. Lose the Hedgehog. Danicat. That's true of every damn make-believe thing. Yeah. Lose the Hedgehog. Not to mention that if you develop a way to manipulate gravity, you also have invented the warp drive. If you have enough power, they work so much the same. They are the same. Yeah, that's the theory. If you listen to Bob Lazar, his theory behind UFOs is that they have these sort of gravity generators. And what happens is that it's not so much the ship is being propelled, but they put a source of gravity in front of the ship, which that way the ship is just falling towards that source of gravity. And that's how it flies. And that's how it can, go, faster than the speed of light or whatever. Which makes sense. I mean, they have also, there's the mathematics behind warping space to have like a warp drive kind of thing have also been figured out. It's just would take the power, like the equivalent power to actually warp space would be, it's the equivalent of using all of the energy in the planet of Jupiter, right? In order to do it. So it's not to say that it's impossible, and that maybe someday in the future they might discover an element that allows it, or they might discover a way to store up that amount of energy and then do it. But from our current technological abilities, it's centuries away. It's going to be 200 or 300 years before we're capable of doing that. I personally think they'll probably discover time travel before they discover warp drive. That's just my own thing. It just seems like the physics behind it seem insurmountable at this point. But who knows? I mean, hell, shit, they might figure it out 50 years from now. We don't know. Somebody out there with a super big brain might figure out how to do this, and then before we know it, in our lifetime, we could be like on fucking Alpha Centauri or some shit. I wouldn't bet on it, but it's possible, right? Let's see. Lewis the Hedgehog. What convinced me that abductions are real is that there are a lot of coincidences. Yeah, it kind of seems like, wait a minute. No images on screen? Okay, you guys can see them. Okay, that was when... Alright. Good, I'm glad you can see it now. Anyway. What convinced me about abductions is that there are a lot of coincidences. Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of, a lot of the tropes, like I was saying, from Barney and Betty Hill, went on to become part of sort of UFO lore. That's definitely true. And, you could say that, well, maybe it's all the same creatures or whatever, and that's why they have the same, it's all the same aliens who are doing the abductions, you know. Maybe, but I somehow don't think that's all there is to it. I really do think that the influence of pop culture on it, really on the UFO community, is definitely accounting for some of these reports. You know what I mean? There are too many coincidences there as well. It's basically anytime something comes out in a movie, there's a report from somebody claiming that it's true. Right. We can't underestimate that. So I don't think they're all fake. I do think that there are some of these that are legit, you know. But we just can't, we just shouldn't believe every single thing you read on, on some website somewhere about UFOs or contactees or whatever. Let's see what else we got here. I'm gonna scan through some of these because I'm like, dude, I'm so hungry. We got to end this pretty soon. Lewis the Hedgehog. Area 51 is in Nevada. Oh, it is? Oh, my mistake. Yeah, I thought it was New Mexico. They thought they could raid Area 51 with a Naruto run. Cute, we have attack helicopters that can turn them into road pizza. Welcome to the real world. That was actually a thing. Yeah, if you remember a few years back, a bunch of kids like kind of got together from 4chan and shit, and they showed up at Area 51, and they were going to do a protest, and this was the idea, is that they were just all going to charge the fences and just run, like jump the fence and run in. And they can't stop all of us, right? But really only like 40 people showed up. So they were planning to have like an army of like, yeah, we'll just get like 5,000 people and we'll all just charge it. What are they going to do? Shoot all of us? But only 40 people actually came, and they just sort of messed around outside, and they never actually charged the gate. They just sort of had like a party outside of Area 51. Right. And the security dudes were there watching them the whole time, and then they went away, unfortunately. So yeah, that was there's actually videos about it on YouTube. It's funny. Like a bunch of freaking weebs running around, like, and people were actually doing the fucking Naruto run or whatever back and forth, but they never actually went through with it. I don't know. Let's see. In Shoma, especially that one contactee who had green exoskeletal skin, wore a trench coat and hat, and had the mustache made of paper. He was very suspicious. What? What are you talking about? Okay. Is that one of your characters, Raph? I don't know. Anyway, Danicat, have you read any Whitley Strieber? Yes. And I'm not sure how credible he is. He had a radio show for a little while too, right? I don't know. It could be credible, but then he also has some weird shit in his claims as well. Like he claimed that like one thing that stuck out to me is that he claimed that the aliens were chain smokers, you know? But then another one of his claims, he said on his radio show that they extracted because he used to be a chain smoker, and then he said that one day that they came to him and gave him this like box with these little carbon tubes in it, and he asked him what it was, and they said, "Oh, we extracted this from your lungs," and then that got him to quit smoking, right? So I don't know. To be honest, I don't know enough about Whitley Strieber. I do have one of his books. I think it's called Transformation, but it's like the second book in the series. It's not the first one. So I'd have to do a little more studying up on him before I could say one way or the other if he's legit or not. I know he's like really famous as a contactee, but who knows? I also know that some of the stuff he says sounds a little fishy to me, sounds a little sus to me, so I'd have to kind of like do a little bit of reading of his work more before I could like make any judgments one way or the other. Let's see. Paralysis. Thank you, Lewis. Paralysis. As you guys all know at home, I am like barely literate at times, so there are certain words I never learned how to spell or read. You know, license, driver's license. I can never spell that fucking word. I always fuck that word up. Record album. I always screw that one up too. And it's because I'm lazy. And if I actually put some effort into it, I could like actually read and write. Anyway, no. But you're kidding. There's certain words that have always given me trouble. I don't know why. That was one of them. Paralysis. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Let's see. Okay, guys, I gotta end this because I'm fucking hungry. But thank you guys all so much. And oh wait, one more comment. Okay, from Dynacat. Zeta Reticuli has no known extrasolar planets. In 2002, it was examined at infrared wavelength of the 25. What is that? I don't know what that stands for. I'm assuming that's a frequency measurement, but no indication of excess or infrared radiation was found. Well, yeah, there you go. So, no planets around Zeta Reticuli. Oh well. Anyway, all right, guys, thank you all so much for joining. I gotta go ahead and end this. Um, we will, of course, we will revisit this subject again because there's so much to it. I want to talk about. I want to talk about contactees. I want to talk about UFO cults. I want to talk about all kinds of stuff. But maybe not next stream because I don't want my channel turning into a UFO channel either. So we'll probably break it up. We'll probably talk about politics next stream, and then come back to UFOs. Anyway, here's where we're at. We're looking pretty good. Got rid of some of that weird seam that was going through the middle there. Before we end this, of course, I need to do my usual ending of the stream speech. So thank you everybody who came. Really appreciate that. Let me see here. Let me just open up all my stuff. Let's see. I do have an Etsy shop for any of those of you who want to support me. Let me just open it up here really quick. Here we go. This here is my Etsy shop. If you like what I do and you want to give me some money in order to support what I do, I'll put this down in the chat for you guys. You can go to my Etsy shop. You can buy something. Here's one that I did just recently. This was actually for a guy who said that I could sell it afterwards, but this is a Lovecraft kind of sigil sort of thing, you know. So that's a very popular one that I got going. So yeah, please consider, you know, buying something if you want to support my channel. This is my webcomic. It is hawanja.com, fun for the whole stupid family. It's got ninjas and people getting, punched in the face and talking ducks in it and, that kind of thing, monsters and demons, etc., etc. Let me put that down in the chat for you guys too, so you can check that out. That's my webcomic. This here is my DeviantArt site, where all of the artwork we do on the channel will eventually end up here. Plus other things. I put my comic on here too, so if you want to see more of my artwork, you can just go to DeviantArt at Hawanja in order to check that out. And of course, this is my other YouTube channel, UCD Videos, which I admittedly have not been doing very much with lately, but I have a lot of cool stuff planned for this. I'm going to start doing lore videos for video games and that kind of thing. So if you want to hear me talk about toys and video games and, other non-political stuff, you can check me out on UCD Videos. Anyway, thank you guys so much. Thank you for sticking with me. Lewis, the Hedgehog, good to see you as always. Pony Throat, great to see you as well. Dynacat loves me. Awesome. Sean Nillabug, great to hear from you. Inshoma, of course, always great to see you as well. Anybody else who joined in, I really appreciate it. And I will be back next Saturday at 11 a.m. Probably to talk about stuff, but not aliens that time. Probably going to be something else besides alien, but we will revisit the alien subject. Thank you all so much, guys. I am out of here.